Welcome to another fantastic and orgasmic episode of the Sovereign CEO podcast. I am Caleb Jones. This is where we talk about how to build location-independent income through your own location-independent business. Make that cash, move to a less bad country, or at least set up an international backup plan and do all these things for very little money. I talk about often the collapse of the West, and I have been predicting the collapse of the West, or at least the United States, for not 20 years, but almost 20 years. Most, not all, but the vast majority of my predictions regarding that have come true. Sometimes the dates are off, but I just did a podcast about why you shouldn't use dates in terms of predictions. And there is a Carl Sagan quote that is going around the internet the last 6 months. You may have seen this, maybe not. It's pretty impressive. It's something he said back in 1995. Now, if you have no context to Carl Sagan, I used to imitate him. I'm Carl Sagan. There's billions and billions of stars in the sky. He sounded like Kermit the Frog. And Carl Sagan was the Neil deGrasse Tyson of his time in the 70s and 80s. He was a big, big guy. I was really into astronomy when I was a kid, so I watched a lot of Carl Sagan. I worshipped him. I thought he was great. Genius. He's actually written movies too. Amazing guy. He is long dead now. One quick fun story about Carl Sagan. I worked with a guy when I was a junior consultant way back in the early 90s. This is way back. It's like 1991, 92. Working with another junior consultant. This is what I did have my own firm. I was working for another firm as an associate consultant, working with another guy who was a few years older than me. And his best friend was next door neighbors for a few years to Carl Sagan. And when Carl Sagan moved in next door, they called him up. Either they did this on the phone or in person. I'm not sure how this worked. They called him up and said, hey, we'd love to have you over for dinner. As a, welcome you as a neighbor. And Carl Sagan said, oh yeah, great. No problem. My fee is $800 an hour. So about 2 hour dinner, $1,600? No problem. I'd love to have dinner with you. The guy's like, well, no, we don't want to hire you as a consultant. We just want to invite you for dinner because we're your next door neighbors. He's like, yeah, yeah, okay, that's great. That sounds great. So my fee is $800. Getting over a cold still, so I'll be coughing a little bit in this podcast. But pretty funny. So amazing guy, a little bit of an arrogant prick, little tiny bit. I mean, I know what it's like to be a little arrogant, but there are ways of handling that. By the way, that hourly rate is around my hourly rate. If I were to charge an hourly rate, which I don't, it'd be around $900,000 an hour. But I would never say to someone if I have dinner, sure, my fee is $900 an hour. I mean, I just don't do that. What I say when people ask that, I'm asked all the time, is I'm too busy, which is also true. So there you go. Anyway, so Carl Sagan wrote in 1995. 1995. How many years ago is this quote? This is amazing. This is one of these amazing quotes that just like blow your mind. So let's do some math here. 1995, 30 years ago, right? No. Let's do some simple math, Caleb, because I went to kindergarten. 1995, 2005, 2015, 2025, 30 years ago. So almost 30 years ago. He wrote a book called The Demon Haunted World, and he made some predictions in that book. And this quote that's going around the internet, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, is right out of that book. Now, what's interesting is the quote is often quoted out of context. I'm going to give you the entire page. I'm not going to read you the entire page. I'm going to give you the before and after of that quote because a lot of people chop a lot of this out of the quote. I'm going to give you the entire quote. So I'm going to go through the quote, and I will give you my analysis on it. And if you are no stranger to my material, none of this will be surprising to you. So very intelligent people, people far more intelligent than me have been predicting the collapse of the USA or the collapse of the Western world far before I was, or around when I was. I am definitely not alone. It's just one of these topics that no one wants to talk about. And I'm quite sure that in 1995, this book was not very popular. I never heard of this book. Obviously, I've heard of Carl Sagan. You probably have too. But I've never heard of this book because it was so negative, no one wanted to hear it. Reminds me of when I started talking about the collapse of the United States way back on my blogs, back in like literally 2011, 2012, and people thought I was crazy. America's going to collapse? No, it's not. What are you talking about? We're doing great. Everything's fine. What the fuck? You're weird. Do they say that today? No. Every once in a while you get someone on my YouTube channel and says, why are you saying it's collapsing? That doesn't make sense. But the vast majority of people who have eyes and see the world, they go, I've mentioned this before, how historically, as in the last 10 to 15 years, when I told people like Germans that Germany was collapsing, they'd be like, oh yeah, our country's fucked. But if I told Americans America was collapsing, they'd be like, what are you talking about? And I've talked about this on the podcast where the typical American, up until 2020, this changed in 2020 with the pandemic and the riots and things like that, but up until 2020, up to 2019, when I said it was collapsing, because it was, they would stick their head out their window and they would look down the street and they would say, well, I don't see any tanks. I don't see any homeless people. You see homeless people now? I don't see any civil unrest. You see it now? I don't see, riots. I don't see, so everything's fine. What do you mean it's collapsing? They don't actually look at any data. Anyway, that's not a little different now since 2020, but oh my God. So anyway, here is the quote. I'll go the whole quote in its entirety and then I will analyze, okay? I have a foreboding of an America in my children or grandchildren's time, which is now, by the way, when the United States is a service and information economy, correct, that happened, when nearly all the key manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, oh my God, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, crazy, huh, 30 years ago, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, oh my God, when the people have lost their ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority. Caleb, yes, they do. Really? Trump supporters question Trump? Don't worry, I'll rewind to all these things. When clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, my God, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness. The dumbing down of America is the most evident in the slow decay of the substantive content. So this is more context now. This is usually not part of the quote. I'll start over. The dumbing down of America is most evident in the slow decay of substantive content in the enormously influential media. The 30-second sound bites now down to 10 seconds or less. The lowest common denominator programming. And this ring a bell? My God. Credulous presentations on pseudoscience. Okay, that's not my area. And superstition, but especially a kind of celebration of ignorance. As I write, the #1 video cassette rental in America is the movie Dumb and Dumber. Beavis and Butthead remains popular and influential with young TV viewers. I will talk about Beavis and Butthead. The main lesson is that study and learning, not just of science, but of anything, are avoidable, even undesirable. And he goes on. But that's the quote. Let me rewind this. I have a foreboding of an America in my children or grandchildren's time when the United States is a service and information economy. So he predicted this back in 1995. So I assume he wrote these words in 1994. This was published in 95. It takes about a year at least to publish a book. So he wrote these words in 1994. And what's fascinating about that is when the outsourcing revolution began. That is the recession of the early 90s that everyone forgot. That is the recession that I went through as a young employee. I went through this myself. I used my first real job, full-time job, was doing technical support for DOS utilities. And this was before they farmed it out to India. This is the early 90s when you could call someone with a computer problem and get an American in America with an American accent. Then in 1993, 94, literally, that's the year this happened, 93, 94, software companies realized they could outsource stuff to India and save thousands upon thousands of dollars because they don't have the labor laws these other countries. That's what happens when you suppress business and you overregulate business, is that you force companies to outsource their things to other countries. And everybody says, you asshole companies, why are you outsourcing stuff? Well, asshole, maybe don't regulate the fuck out of companies. That wouldn't happen. It's real simple. Capitalism works. I'm sorry, it works. It's not perfect. There are problems with it, but it works the best. Overregulated capitalism, quasi-socialism, corporatism, the shit we have now doesn't work very well, does it? Anyway, that's what started happening in the early 90s. And when I left Central Point Software, my first job, going into the consulting world, they were literally, the company I worked for was a DOS utilities company, software company, about 400 employees. They were bought out by Symantec. And as soon as they were bought out, they were immediately, all the tech support people were fired and they farmed it all out to India. First, they farmed out to a few firms in the United States and they quickly farmed out to India. So this is when this was beginning to occur, and he saw the writing on the wall and he said, okay, this is going to be everything now. We're not going to manufacture anything. He was right. Pretty impressive. Later you had The World. What's that book written by that journalist called The World is Flat about globalization? That was in the late 90s, but by the late 90s, you could kind of see this stuff. So he was really prescient on these items. That's my favorite word for the day, prescient. Aren't I smart? When all the key manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, absolutely. Very true. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So people think it is a bad thing, or people in the 90s certainly thought it was a bad thing. The way it works is this. When you're on an economically growing or advancing country, you do outsource the lower end functions, and this is normal. For example, after World War II, Japan became slowly, after they recovered from the war, they became a manufacturing power, a manufacturing country. And way back in the 50s, if you saw made in Japan, that was the crappy shit because they weren't very good at it. Then Deming went over to Japan, gave them all of his secrets, okay? Constant, never-ending improvement, all that stuff, right? And then by the 80s, when I was a kid, Japan, if you had something made in Japan, that was the cool shit. That was the best stuff. There's a line in Back to the Future, one of the Back to the Future movies, where the DeLorean is broken and Doc Brown pulls out of things like, well, no wonder it's broken. It says made in Japan. And Marty, who's from the 80s, says, Doc, that's where all the best stuff comes from. And the Doc is like, what? Because he's from the 50s. Now, what happened? What happened is in the 80s, Japan started farming out their manufacturing to whom? To Hong Kong. One of my formerly favorite countries in the world. So when you bought a toy in the 80s, when you bought a really cool piece of electronic equipment that was awesome, it was made in Japan. If you bought a cheap plastic shitty toy in the 80s, and I bought a lot of those because I was poor in the 80s, especially early days, you bought Star Wars shit or whatever, it would say on the bottom, made in Hong Kong. Now, do you see a lot of stuff made in Hong Kong today? No. What happened is that Japan farmed out its manufacturing to Hong Kong, and Japan assumed more services, information, finances, things like that, higher end stuff. Hong Kong, what happened there? Well, Hong Kong started farming out its manufacturing to where? To China and Southeast Asia. So now, do you see a lot of stuff manufactured in Hong Kong? Not really. Hong Kong has become a financial hub, right? Singapore also, you could make a similar comparison. Not a lot of stuff manufactured in Singapore anymore. It's a financial hub. And so they farmed out their manufacturing to China and Southeast Asia. So now all the sweatshops and stuff are where? China and Southeast. Then China started farming out to more Southeast Asia, right? So this is a progression that countries go through. It's not necessarily bad. What is bad is everything else he's talking about. He's talking about this, and I don't want to make his own analysis, I'll give you my analysis. It's all these other problems he listed, plus the fact we don't manufacture. Now, are there some reasons that you should keep manufacturing in a country? Yes. We discovered this during COVID, and a lot of right-wingers, pre-Trump, before the right went insane, made this point, and they were right. They said, look, if we manufacture everything in China, everything, what happens if we go to war against China? How do we build our bombs, tanks, planes? Everything's manufactured in China. We're fucked. So you need to manufacture some stuff in your home country, right? Right. And it's true. It's valid. You don't want to manufacture 100% of your stuff offshore, unless you're a very tiny country and you can't do it. Okay? So, all right, moving on. Let's see, where am I in my quote here? Moving on to this quote. When awesome technological powers are in the hands of very few. Right. Now, we've seen a slight reversal with this with Elon and Twitter, but as I've predicted, and I will be right, this will not be a sea change. Social media will continue to be left-wing. Social media will continue to be authoritarian. Social media on the overall will continue to ban people, to cancel people. Just ask Alex Jones, ask Stefan Molyneux, ask Donald Trump. Sorry, this is going to continue, and this trend is going to get worse, not better. Some people seem to think that, oh my God, Elon bought Twitter, everything's fine now. No, it's just like when they said Trump's elected a president, everything in the United States is going to be perfect now. No, dumbasses, no. That is not rational analysis, that's your emotions. So yes, this is the case now. It's going to get worse. With AI coming on board, AI could be the hands of the very few. I do know that ChatGPT is run by a bunch of left-wingers, and ChatGPT has a strong left-wing bias. all these jokes about what do you think about, describe Joe Biden and it's all positive, describe Donald Trump and it's all negative. I'm exaggerating, but there is a strong political bias now in ChatGPT. Why? Because vast technological powers are in the hands of very few. And this is going to get worse, not better. Get ready. This is all going to get worse, folks. Let's see here. When no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues. You know what? When I immediately thought of when I read that, when Mark Zuckerberg was called in front of Congress about a year ago, and you had these old men, because Congress is made up of a bunch of old, out-of-touch white men, okay? All these old white men. One of them was, what's his name? I don't remember his name. Anyway, one of the many old, out-of-touch guys in his 80s or 90s sitting in Congress who you morons have chose to run the United States by voting for the lesser of two evils for 35 years and only voting for Democrats and Republicans, which is absolutely completely insane. And the number one reason the United States is collapsing now, top of another time, but you guys fucking did this. Don't look at me. I didn't do this. I didn't vote for these people. You fuckers did, or at least you supported them. And that's why you now have a bunch of out-of-touch old men in their 80s and 90s running the country. Good job, guys. So one of these old men, I couldn't believe what I was watching. This is one of the, his name's on the tip of my tongue. I'll come to me in a second. He's one of the key people in Congress. This is one of the people who literally run the United States. He's asking Mark Zuckerberg about Facebook. He's like, well, isn't your service free? And Mark Zuckerberg says, yes, he's a robot. Yes, it is free. Because Mark Zuckerberg's a robot, right? He's like, well, that sounds, how do you make any money if it's free? And he literally said, he goes, how do you make any money? This sounds very fishy to me. I don't know. This whole Facebook social media thing is very fishy. How can you possibly make any money if it's free? Mark Zuckerberg is one of the wealthiest men in the history of the universe. And Mark Zuckerberg, he's a robot. Now, if it were me, I'd say, are you fucking kidding, Mr. Congressman? You literally don't know. You run this fucking country and you have no idea how social media makes money. But Mark Zuckerberg is not Caleb. So Mark Zuckerberg said, well, we sell ads. I submit to you, if you don't know how social media works, you're retarded. And you certainly shouldn't be running anything. So again, once again, Carl Sagan nails this. The people running this country don't know shit. You should see the books they've written about Donald Trump. When he was president and they were talking to him, Bill Gates talking about having a conversation with Donald Trump, where Donald Trump didn't know the difference between HPV and HIV. He didn't know the difference. Now, you might say, well, I don't know the difference. Well, A, you're a moron if you don't know the difference, especially if you have sex with women. B, you don't run the United States. You should probably know the fucking difference. There was another advisor where Trump was talking about Finland. They were talking about Finland with Trump, and Trump said, well, Russia owns Finland, so... And the advisor's like, what? Yeah, well, Russia owns Finland. He goes, no, Mr. President, Russia doesn't own Finland. Trump thought Russia owned Finland, and he's in charge of the country. So, Mr. President, actually, no. And Trump's like, yeah, it does. I'm pretty sure it does. I think you need to check your facts. Okay, so these are the kind of people now running the country. Again, your fault, Americans, for voting these morons into office. I don't do this. But he's right. Few representing the public interest even grasp the issues. So not only do you have a civilization in decline, you have cultural decline, you have fiscal collapse. You are run, you in the West, because I don't live in the West anymore. Haha, your problem. You in the West, United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, are run by morons. Complete morons who are completely out of touch and know what the fuck they're doing. Not a recipe for a happy next few years. Okay, moving on. When the people have lost their ability to set their own agendas or knowingly question those in authority. Right. So this began with Obama. I wrote about this in my, excuse me, I talked a lot about this in my blogs at the time. We have entered, starting with Obama in around 2008, the Western world has entered into a zone of hero worship, where you have these people who irrationally worship these politicians. It was Obama for 8 years, and then it was Trump for 4 years. Still Trump with a lot of people, where they irrationally worship these men, no matter what they do, no matter what they say, no matter how horrible they govern, no matter the mistakes they make, no matter the stupid comments they make, no matter how stupid they are in the case of Trump, or how evil and out of touch they are in the case of Obama, and various other people. I've talked about how the right wing, the modern day right wing that's lost its mind since Trump, is addicted to hero worship. Years ago, it was Milo Yiannopoulos. people worship Milo. You guys forgot this happened, but this was just a few years ago. People would cut their hair and dye their hair blonde to look more like Milo Yiannopoulos and put pictures of Milo on their Twitter pages. Famous people did this, okay? Then Milo imploded, right? Then it was Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson imploded, almost killed himself with drugs. Then it was Donald Trump. Then he got in trouble, okay? Now it's Andrew Tate. Not necessarily a right-wing figure, but a young guy figure. Then he has his problems. So it's this constant hero worship of, I love these people, please. And again, do Trump supporters question Trump? Did Obama supporters, when Obama was bombing 7 different countries, killing thousands of civilians on purpose, because they called double tap. Let me remind you what Obama did, Obama supporters and you left-wingers. What he would do is he would bomb a town, wait for the ambulance and the fire trucks and the families go out and help you who are bombed, then he personally ordered this, take the drone, make a circle, go back and bomb them. Okay, this is what he did. Did you see a lot of Obama supporters questioning Obama when he was doing this? No. Once he was gone, they did. But during those 8 years, did you? No. When Trump was running for president, he said, I'm going to build a wall, build a wall, build a wall. And all of his supporters, throughout all 2016, that's all they could say. Build the wall, 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 build the wall. That's all they did, okay? Trump got in office, and as I predicted in 2016 before he was elected, he did not build the wall. He actually signed bills saying he would not build the wall. Did you see any Trump supporters say, what the fuck? He didn't build the wall. He lied to us. Fuck this guy. Did you see one Trump supporter? No. Now, you did see one. You saw Ann Coulter. Good for her. Don't agree with her on a lot of things, but at least she has some integrity. Other than Ann Coulter, did you see one Trump supporter on the internet say, what the fucking fuck? Fuck this. Fuck this guy. No. They said, I don't care. I love him anyway because I'm insane. So he's right. You cannot question authority anymore because you worship your leaders. These psychotic, irrational, stupid, incompetent leaders. So not only do you have stupid, incompetent leaders that we just talked about, huge swaths of the population worship these people. Look at the people who worshiped Angela Merkel, who supported Angela Merkel when she drove that country, Germany, into the dirt. And they loved her for it. That's why I call it suicidal Europe. They're even worse over there in Europe than the United States. All right, moving on. When clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical failures in decline, critical faculties in decline. Now, he didn't call this exactly. You don't have a lot of people like worshiping crystals and horoscopes. But instead what you have is people on the left and people on the right screaming about things like gender. No one gave a shit about gender 6 years ago. Now it's the #1 topic of the entire Western world. Right, so this is their version of worshiping crystals and horoscopes. Okay? If you don't date a transgender person, you're horrible. You're a horrible person. You're against trans. There's no such thing as gender. Right? And if you even say that, then the right-wingers go crazy. Yes, there is. And Matt Walsh does a big documentary and yells at people. And right-wingers, why don't you focus on like the Federal Reserve and taxes and the debt, things that affect everyone. So this trans bullshit, who cares? But again, lost rationality, right? So faculties in decline, there's it. Unable to distinguish between what feels good and what is true. Well, now that I would apply to things like stimmy checks. One of the big reasons people voted for Joe Biden is he promised to give people a $2,500 stimmy check in November or December after he was voted. And of course, I predicted he wouldn't, and I was right, he didn't. He said, sorry, huh? And again, did you say, well, did Biden supporters say, well, fuck Biden? No, they just kept right on. Well, at least I don't have Trump anymore. Okay? Again, it's not a left-right thing. They're both insane. The left has always been insane. The right went insane around 2010, went really crazy around 2016. The dumbing down of America is most evident, the slow decay of the substantive content in the enormously influential media. So if you look at you could Google this, IQs are declining something like 10 points every, I don't know the exact number. You could Google this. I should have it in front of my screen, but I don't. Average Western IQs are declining every decade by several points. Whereas Eastern IQs are rising. People in the West now, are literally getting dumber. Literally. Objectively, scientifically. This is not an opinion. Don't believe me? Go look it up. Say declining IQ scores. Western IQ scores. You'll see all the articles and all the data. It's horrible. The reason I don't do a lot of blogging anymore and I do more video and audio is because why? People don't like to read anymore. Now, there are niches who still like to read, and I know a lot of you do. That's great. I read. But in terms of the population, no, they don't. Right? 30-second sound bites now down to 10 seconds or less. Now, that is true with a lot of people. However, you could make the counter argument that long-form podcasts do well. And they're saying, well, this is weird. People have low attention spans, but like long-form podcasts introduced by Joe Rogan are now doing well. Well, I would submit to you that is a percentage of the internet, not the entire internet. Most of the internet like TikTok, and they swipe, right? Tinder, swipe sideways. TikTok, swipe up, right? Right. Lowest common denominator, programming, credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition. Okay. Credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition. What did everyone fucking say during the pandemic? Wear your mask or you're going to kill everybody. Did you kill everybody? No. Less than a 1% death rate. It was a flu with a 1% death rate. That's what the left or the scared people said during the pandemic. They said social distancing, 6 feet. My understanding from the data is social distancing literally did nothing. Masks did help. Social distancing, my understanding of the data is, accomplished nothing. All those circles, all those stores put on the accomplished nothing. Pseudoscience. It wasn't started in a lab, right? But it was. Now, you're thinking, yeah, those fucking dumb right woke people, those dumb left-wing woke people and those dumb scared, yeah, they're idiots. And yeah, oh, what about you fucking Trump people? What did you say? I attacked you guys too because you were just as irrational. What did you say? You were screaming this all over my YouTube channels. You're making me wear a mask? How dare you? I'm going to die. I'm going to breathe my own carbon dioxide. I can't wear a mask because I might breathe my own carbon dioxide. Factually, scientifically impossible. Carbon dioxide molecules are smaller than the largest holes in any mask. You're a moron. And they had all these things about, well, if I breathe my own air, or as I discussed on my big COVID wrap-up video, I went through all the data, all the predictions I made that were all right, and everything that everyone else said that were all wrong. And they said shit like you're going to get myocarditis if you get the vaccine. The vaccine has nanobots from Bill Gates. So the right was just as insane as the left. Everyone lost their goddamn minds. Credulous presentations on pseudoscience and a celebration of ignorance. 30 years ago, he wrote this. Now, let me talk really quick about Dumb and Dumber and Beavis and Butthead. Dumb and Dumber, he's right. He's right about that. Here's the thing about Beavis and Butthead. I'll end with this. This is the one place in which I disagree. And I think I know why he's making this point. Do you think Carl Sagan ever actually sat down and watched several episodes long of Beavis and Butthead? No. Beavis and Butthead is actually extraordinarily intelligent. Beavis and Butthead, I've said before, is one of the best television shows, best television comedies ever made on TV. It is the one television show that's caused me to laugh out loud more than any other show in my lifetime, and I'm in my 50s. And I've seen some funny shows. Not anymore. They're all stupid now. But, you know, in the 80s, Golden Girls was hilarious. Golden Girls. I'm dating myself. In the 80s, I was in high school. I'm a high school boy watching a show about 4 old ladies living together in a house. Why would I do that? Because it was fucking hilarious. There was one old lady who was like a hoe and was banging all these dudes. There was another old lady who was like a retard and didn't know anything. There was the cranky Sicilian old lady who was just totally mean. It was phenomenally funny. I don't know if it'd be funny now. I should go rewatch an episode, see if it holds up. But back then it was really funny. I laughed a lot. Cheers is a really funny show. Several pretty funny shows. The initial seasons of 2.5 Men were reasonably funny. Reasonably. No show has made me laugh like Beavis and Butthead. And there's a new Beavis and Butthead out now where Mike Judge bought it back from NTV or something. It's just as good. I'm amazed. It's just as funny. I'm still laughing just as hard. And the intelligence of where Beavis and Butthead comes from, especially considering the fact that a lot of that is ad-libbed, on where the mind of the 14-year-old boy is. The reason Beavis and Butthead, I watched that when I was in the 90s instead of watching Beverly Hills 90210, is that Beavis and Butthead more accurately represented how teenage boys actually think and talk. Then you watch Beverly Hills 90210 when it first came out in the early 90s, and everyone was so excited about it. Oh, it's so great. All these people my age, late teens, early 20s, mid-20s, would watch Beverly Hills 90210. You watch that show, I watched like 2 episodes. All these teenagers are talking like, they're speaking like, they're quoting Shakespeare, and they're very intelligent and articulate, and they all these schemes and plans, and they're just so smart. And I'm like, that's not how teenagers are. Teenagers are stupid. Yes, including teenage girls. I know a little something about teenage girls. Watch my other content. So no, I'm like, this is not how teenagers act or talk or think. And then you go to Beavis and Butthead. and you see two 14-year-old boys going, and they're at the pet store looking at a parrot, and they're like, where's his butt? Yeah, that's how teenage boys talk, and that's how they think. Yes. So that's why it worked. Now, I would bet $10,000 Carl Sagan never watched an episode or two fully, all the way through, of Beavis and Butthead to appreciate what looked like stupid toilet humor, but actually done very intelligently. That's why he throws in there. I'm sure he just heard the name Beavis and Butthead and saw a little thing going, and going, well, that's a show for idiots. And it was a stupid show, but it's a stupid show written very intelligently. If you don't believe me, go watch some episodes. It's hilarious. And it's smart. Mike Judge is a genius. So that's the one place which I disagree. But again, that is because he didn't delve into the data like I did. So that's it. This is all getting worse, folks. I'm sorry. What's the answer? Location-independent income through your own location-independent business. And if you're willing to do it, 5 flags or some variation of 5 flags, an international plan B. Or if you really want to do this hardcore, like me, get the fuck out of the collapsing Western world, and these problems will affect you much less. It's not that they won't affect you at all. AI will affect everybody. But as I've talked about when I talk about AI, it's going to affect me with my Alpha 2.0 lifestyle and business models and finances and investments far less than the majority of normal humans, because I'm arrayed to be safe in these terms, these things. Make sense? Cool. See you next podcast, guys.